Good morning.
Good morning.
This morning we are in Matthew chapter 26, verses 69 through 75. And I hope that this sermon makes you miserable. And I mean that. And I say that because I have had to deal with this one all week. And it has eaten my lunch. So I hope that you can also be miserable so that I'm not the only one. Because there's some proverb or something, not from the Bible, but just saying, I guess I should say, for the distinction that misery loves company. So I hope that we all get to wallow in that for the next 40 minutes or 30 minutes. Who knows? Maybe I'll go short. Anyways, let's read the text because I should fly from here. Matthew chapter 26, starting with verse 69. Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him and said, "You too were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." When he had gone out to the gateway, another servant girl saw him and said to those who were there, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." And again he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." A little later the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Surely you too are one of them, for even the way you talk gives you away." Then he began to curse and swear, "I do not know the man." And immediately a rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the word which Jesus had said, "Before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Father God, as we look this morning at perhaps Peter's lowest moment, I would just ask that you would help us to not just see the failure of one, but that honestly the failure of us all are there. But also more than that, help us to see what really drives Peter here at this point, so that we will recognize that in ourselves, and so that we will see him not completely as bad off as we often think of him in this passage. God, help us to understand who you are better in this passage as well. And in your name we pray. Amen. So a little bit of context around this. One, even though this is given in a chronological right after what we looked at last week, this is actually in that overlapping moment. So it's not that the kangaroo pre-trial, see if we're going to actually charge him, we know that we are, but we're going to go through the motions, thing happens, they take Jesus off, punch him in the face a little bit and mock him, and then this with Peter happens. While Jesus' trial is going, and trial is the wrong word for this, but I don't know what else to call it, it's that pre-trial thing of, is this going to be enough to actually get us to be able to kill him? Then Peter's denial is happening in the background. But just like when we make movies, it's hard to cut from these two things are happening simultaneously and we're just going to split your screen in half. It gets a little convoluted and weird. So with that in mind, that's the time frame here. This is a night trial. It's not an official trial. No real verdict can be reached, though they've already reached the verdict before they start. This is the, do we have the evidence we need, or do we need to just keep coming up with more trial? Because this is what they're going for. They finally have arrested Jesus. They have finally gotten, if you'll remember last week, we looked at how they brought in, person after person after person to try and get 2 people to agree on something that he did that was unlawful. And when you're making up stuff, it's really hard to agree with people. So that goes poorly for them. And finally, they get him on what is honestly more a misrepresentation of what he says than even what he says of, well, he says he can tear down the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Which for us is like, well, that's sort of what he said. But it also is dripping with messianic or Messiah-like implications. There had been a growing understanding, and I don't know that it's necessarily a correct view, but a growing understanding that the Messiah was going to build a temple. And that was one of the ways in which you were going to know that he was the Messiah. So when Jesus starts talking about 3 days, temple, well, that seems like Messiah language, which it is. It's just he's not building a temple. He is building a temple, which is you and all the rest of us that have Jesus. We become that touch point. Well, that's what all of those Old Testaments were looking at. So now we get to the part, though, where we are uber familiar. This is one of those passages that if you have spent any time in church, and knowing your backgrounds, you've spent time in church, that it comes up often. We really like to throw rocks at Peter. For whatever reason, and I think it's because he's the loudmouth of the group, and just gives us so much ammunition. We like to throw rocks at Peter. But there are a few things about this that I want to highlight as we go. Because at least the movie in my head, I think of things visually. So even when I read them, I see them. Which is why I'm really careful about what I read. I do not need you to make a movie. My brain just thinks in pictures. And when I remember something, I think in pictures. But anyways, back to the text. Because we got a lot of ground to cover. So no squirreling today. Yeah, that's what I think. But we find Peter here. And there are a few things that I want to make sure that we're catching. Because this is part of I've always had the movie wrong in my head. We are not at the temple. We are not in any public spot. We are in the high priest's house, a private residence. We are at a place in which we are intentionally doing the pre-trial under the radar. As much as under the radar can happen on a holiday weekend with the beloved Messiah and with the rabbi. But this is an intentionality of we're going to go over here and have it behind locked doors. This is not an open access to the public, come and go as you will. The only reason that Peter is actually here, the only reason he gets admitted is because John, the other disciple, knows the high priest. Never find out how he knows the high priest. Just if you read John's account in his gospel, then and John, being an acquaintance of the high priest, does the handshake and gets him in. I made up the handshake part. But he kind of, and he pulls whatever strings. We don't know how they know each other. If it's their families go way back, which would be really weird, or what the deal is. But John is known to Ananias. That's his right name. Caiaphas is listed in Matthew's gospel as the high priest, and just so that we can smooth this, Caiaphas is sort of high priest, Ananias is sort of high priest. Caiaphas has been the high priest for a long running time. The Romans look and go, he's getting a little too much influence and authority. So they kind of push him out. But his son-in-law, Ananias, becomes high priest. And I think he becomes the son-in-law to become high priest. If you read historically, he's a jerk. Surprise, the guy who's spearheading the death of Jesus is a jerk. But in any case, they would have lived also together, which is why in some of the gospel accounts they've taken him to the high priest Ananias' house. And in Matthew's account here, it's the high priest Caiaphas' house. It pretty much is the same thing. It's kind of like some of your houses, I don't know if y'all have, but there are houses that have the mother-in-law quarters. It's kind of similar. If you divided a house in half, they kind of have a duplex thing going on. It's not that abnormal to have parents and children and grandparents and great-grandchildren all living under the same roof. So, with that being in mind, don't let that throw you. But this is where Peter is, which is important. Because he has followed, at a safe distance, because he's not an idiot, the procession that has just arrested Jesus in the garden after cutting off a guy's ear, by the way. Let's keep that in mind. He's a fisherman, not a warrior. We can give him some grace with the fact that he clearly isn't very good with the sword. Or maybe he's really good with the sword if that was what he was aiming at. I don't know. Because there is one theory that he cuts off the guy's ear in a way to disqualify him from being able to serve in the temple. I think that's giving him too much credit in the heat of the moment. I don't think he's that lucid. I think he's reacting. But anyways, not to preach that sermon here, because we got a lot of ground to cover. So Peter is where he is because he loves Jesus. So let's not miss that point. He is already in harm's way. So before we spend the next few minutes talking about, come on Peter, man up buttercup, which has been kind of my favorite phrase this week, because I find myself, it almost was man up buttercup, the sermon title, and then I thought no, because I'm going to throw rocks at the phrase, so I can't use it as a title. But this is not that passage. I think we do it really kind of an injustice when we look at him and go, oh, if he only loved Jesus more. No, he loves Jesus. Let's also keep in mind, this is a very great demonstration, as if we needed validation that the words of Jesus were true. When Jesus looks at him and says, you know what, Peter? You say you're not going to deny me. You say you're going to stick with me to the end, even if it costs you your life. And your spirit is willing, but that flesh thing, that's weak. You want to. I see that you love me. I see that you're dedicated. I see your fidelity, your loyal love. So I'm going to use that term. A love built on loyalty or a loyalty built on love. Who knows? It could go either way. And that's the beauty of fidelity. But here, that is what draws Peter and John, though we don't hear anything about John. I don't know if he was like, okay, I got you in. Now it's up to you. Or if he sticks around. I don't know. I don't know what happens to John. But this is about Peter. So that's where we're going to focus. Peter is here because he loves Jesus. He fails because he loves Jesus. Now, I'm going to flesh that out a little bit further as we go, because swearing that you don't know somebody is a weird way to show your love. But he is in the position that he is in because he loves Jesus. Not because he doesn't love Jesus. Not because he is, well, I'll go hide in a hole somewhere. Thaddeus, James, Thomas, they're all somewhere else. Everybody except for Judas, who is hanging himself somewhere off to the side here pretty soon. That actually isn't, well, it's actually next week. I was about to say it. Anyways, not important. And then we know that John is with him, but the rest of the disciples have scattered to the four winds. We have no earthly idea where the other guys are, but they're hiding in some dank hole, I'm sure, because they are terrified. Peter is brought to the place of harm's way and goes literally into the lion's den because that's where Jesus is. I'm going to go into the one place that is the most unsafe because I love Jesus. That's Peter. So before we just pick up and say, yep, coward, this just proves it. No. Think about where he is. He is in the private pre-trial of Jesus. He's gotten in by some side connections, but he's there. So that is where we find Peter. This is a great statement of Peter's love, because I'm also going to help you out. If you follow Jesus, guess where you will go? You will go to places that aren't necessarily safe. That aren't necessary, there are no safe places in Christianity. There is no place where Jesus goes that we go, well, Jesus, this is a little bit iffy of a neighborhood. Can we go over to the railroad? We'll just cross the tracks and be okay, Jesus. No. Jesus goes, and if you love Jesus, you go where Jesus goes. And Jesus likes to go to the poor and the needy. He likes to go to the broken. and the people who are willing to admit that they need Jesus. Well, if you're going to follow Jesus, well, you're going to be like Peter. You're going to go to the place that is probably most hostile to Jesus, because that is where Jesus likes to go, because he likes to be that guy that confounds the wise. He likes to go to those places where nobody wants him. And then surprisingly, everybody wants him. It's weird that way. But that's Peter. Peter is following Jesus. He doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have some great coup idea of, I smuggled in my sword, Jesus told me to put it away, but I'm just, the first opportunity, rebellion. He's not counting on Simon the Zealot, the other disciple, to come over the hill like Gandalf with the elven army and save the day. No, he is expecting, well, I guess Jesus was right. He is going to die, but I've got to see this through. I've got to see it to the end, and it's probably going to be me too. That's Peter right here, out of fidelity. So let's start off with the correct understanding. He needs to see what happens to Jesus. He needs to see where Jesus is going to go. And in that, he is sitting outside in the courtyard. He is sitting, again, in a place that's not exactly kosher. Now, we understand that he's going to fail here because in the garden, it shouldn't have been that hard of a word to remember. In the garden, Jesus says, I need you all to pray, and Peter, you should pray because Satan wants to sift you like wheat. And he says, okay, and then he's asleep 3 times. Well, okay, this is, humanistically speaking, why he failed. He has failed to prepare, thus he fails his plan. But he's there nonetheless. So I don't want to miss that correlation. That's very clear in the way in which Matthew has written the gospel, and so with the other ones. But as he is sitting in the courtyard, a servant comes up to him. Now it is a servant girl. And the other thing that I want to kind of adjust in our head is Peter is not sitting alone. He is likely sitting around the fire with the same people who he just drew a sword on like 10 minutes earlier. So keep that in mind. He has not started off well where they're like, well, Jesus' followers, they're all hippies. No. One of them just drew a sword on us. We're not really on the best of terms. Even if we could overlook it as, well, yeah, this is where that's going, you drew a sword on us. So when she comes up, he's not isolated. He's not by himself. This isn't they're standing out in the parking lot having a conversation, which is also, again, to do a little bit of an apologetic, if you read the accounts of this in the other Gospels, you'll get, well, Matthew says it's 2 girls and a bystander, and over here it's because there's a crowd with each one of these questions. It's not that there are a multitude of denials and each writer picks which one they like the best to paint them in whichever picture they want to. This is a crowd, and if you've ever been in a crowd, once one person starts an accusation, it just keeps going around. No, Oh, well, I think, okay, that's what we have here. So yes, it started by a girl who walks up to him, but he's not isolated. There's a whole group around him. So once she opens the floodgates, if you will, breaks the levee, out comes all of and these people are geared up. Because while the disciples are exhausted from that, they've got the adrenaline rush of, we're going to kill the troll. They've just gone out with sticks and clubs and torches, and they're going to get him, and now they're coming off their adrenaline high. So it doesn't take much to get them right back up and going. So when she looks at them and says, you were with Jesus the Galilean. Now, notice how she refers to him. The Galilean. This is actually pejorative, which is a fancy way of saying she's mocking him. She is making fun. This would be about the equivalent of if somebody asked you, hey, you go to Anchor Point where the pastor's a hillbilly, right? I mean, you got, which is actually true. I am kind of a hillbilly, just so we're clear. But in that process, hillbilly is not, by most people's standards, a term meant to endear one. Like, you know, you use it as a, yeah, them people, the hill folk. Hill folk? Yeah, that one's fun. I had to reach for that one. But in the like, it's the statement of, yeah, you're with Jesus, the big dumb country bumpkin. I mean, because that's what we think of Galilee as a region. They were hillbillies. So just remember that the next time you want to make fun of my culture. Okay, Jesus is one of us. But in the course of things, so she says, you're with that guy. So why does Peter have the opportunity to fail as miserably as he does? Because one, he's with Jesus out of love. But proximity-wise, he's also with Jesus. Somehow somebody goes, I remember seeing Jesus teaching, and you were right by his side. This is what that is the statement of. It's, you're with Jesus. I think a lot of the time, the reason we don't get tempted to fail like Peter is because we're just not with Jesus. I think by and large, the church universal is so very stinking far from Jesus. That is why we never get the same accusation. Why we never get pushed this hard. Now it's going to come, and people are either going to get on or off real quick. I mean, we're not exactly in warm and fuzzy waters anymore. But we're also not really in that big of a storm either. Just to be honest. It'll get worse. I'm sure of it. It always does. I like history. That's how this works. I don't say that prophetically, I say that academically, just so we're clear. I don't want to get rocks thrown at me if I'm wrong. I'd like to be wrong in this case. But it is proximity. No, we know that you are with Jesus. That's why he can fail. Because he failed to prepare, check. Okay, we've got that. This is, humanly speaking, a big issue. If you don't take the time to prepare when you have the opportunity in the garden, in the courtyard, you plan to fail. Fail to plan to fail, I think is the way in which that's supposed to go. But here, if you love Jesus, you're going to go into a place like the courtyard. If you love Jesus and you've been with Jesus, people are going to take note of that. There have been multiple times in my life that I hate to the fact that I'm about to admit to this, in which, as I have been living my life, there is that one moment in which my fleshy part just takes over and runs unchecked, and I just let somebody have it. And I have like a dozen examples in my head, and I'm not going to confess to any single one of them from the pulpit right now. But where it just comes out, and I feel good for all of about 2 seconds, because it's like, yeah, I got that off my chest. Take that, dork. And then 2 seconds after I feel, top of the world, then I realize, oh man, stupid. And the response is, aren't you with Jesus? Yes, which means I'm wrong. And then I've got to do the whole apology thing, and then I've got to do the whole eating crow thing, and then I've got to acknowledge the fact that I just made Jesus look bad thing, and So another example of this is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Why do they go into the fiery furnace? Because they're with Yahweh. If they don't care, then they can just tie their shoelaces. I don't know that they had shoelaces. But, play like they bow down. We'll just take a nap while you do your thing. Whatever. And they're fine. But they're with Yahweh, so they're not going to compromise it. Daniel, from the same book, Lion's Den, same issue. We can go through, and there are all of these examples, but that's the point. If you're with Jesus, you're going to have the opportunity to fail. I mean, if expecting a guaranteed, no-fail course of life, Christianity is a bad option. Because that's how we refine people. Now this is going to also come up later, and I'm confident that Peter learned his lesson, and I'll tag that in at the end. But here, he is confronted, yes, by a little girl, who is both by her gender, non-assuming, in the sense of like he doesn't have anything to worry about from the girl, her age, probably the way in which the Greek, has this listed. She's a young servant girl. So by her gender, her age, and her position, there's really nothing to fear. And sometimes we like to, again, point out, oh, and I've made the comment in order for effect a couple of times. But really, she is one of a crowd that is around him. And he's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. With him? No, I don't know that I'm with him. And he just lets it die down. And then we see when he had gone out to the gateway. So he has the conversation, kind of denies it, and then, well, maybe the fire's not the best place. Maybe I'll go over here. And in the landscape, the gateway is about as close to the exit as you can get without being at the exit. It would be the same as if I went from here to the front door. He is ready to bolt. And I think that that's really what this is. I think he's smart enough to go, that could have cost me my life. I'll stand on the edge of the crowd. That way I'm not in the crowd. I can still see Jesus. And he is close enough, by the way, to see Jesus and Jesus to see him. If you read some of the other accounts, you will get that as the rooster crows, you get one of these from Jesus, where Jesus and Peter make eye contact. Which has to be like one of the most haunting things ever. Matthew doesn't record that detail, and I think it's because Matthew's not there. To be really honest with you, I think it really just haunts Peter. And I'm betting that when Peter feels like giving up, he remembers that look and goes, no, not going there again. But in the process, he's now gone to a safe place, since I've mocked the term already. And while he is there, another girl comes up and says, I saw him, or sees him, and said, those who were there, this man, now she's not just asking in front of people, she is not even asking, to be honest with you. She is telling. This man is with Jesus the Nazarene. Again, Nazarene is the armpit of the armpit. This is again a very pejorative. We're mocking him in his tone. We're clearly not calling him the Messiah, for obvious reasons. If you are trying to get him killed, you're not going to call him the Messiah. All of these terms are meant to, we're not even calling him a prophet or a teacher at this point. He's just the guy from that little small podunk village over there that none of us like and none of us really care about. Yeah, he's from Possum Holler, if I can just borrow from a TV show. Never mind. But this is that statement. So here, she's telling the crowd, he's one of them. And I'm sure that some of that is, she's thinking, how did he get in here? He's one of them. We need to be paying attention. So this is now not even a statement to Peter. This is an accusing, getting the crowd stirred up. They're coming at him now. When they turn to Peter, this is now not a at all safe environment for him. Even being close to the door, this is his life. And I think he's smart enough to see that. And we need to understand that this is not just simply Peter's association, pedigree, future employment possibilities on the line here. This is Peter's life. And Peter sees it. He sees the hostile crowd that is still ready to go, now being stirred up. And how does he respond? I don't know the man. But he uses an oath. This is, I swear to you. And he likely puts, we don't know which of the oaths he puts, but it's swearing by something. The perceived is that he swears by God's name. That is the likelihood, but we don't have what he put his oath on. In first century Judaism, there was actually a ranking of things that you swore by that's kind of mocked earlier in this same gospel, where you can swear by the altar, but not the things on the altar. You can swear by the temple, but you can't swear by, this over here. And it was all double talk. It was all weird ways of, I swear by my mama's grave. Well, my mom's not dead. She doesn't have a grave. So I got you there. Haha. Really? You just tried to convince me that by giving me your word on something that was important, and you're using it in church, like it totally is irrelevant and defeats the purpose of the whole thing, and just shows the brokenness of people's hearts. So here, Peter just throws out, I swear, and I think that this is the most likely, I swear by God, I don't know the man. I don't have any association with him whatsoever. And I think Peter does this to save his neck. Now, yes, I understand that Peter failed to prepare. I get that. He didn't spend the time in the garden like he should have. So, spend time in the garden the way you should. Don't spend it asleep. Don't be a sleeping disciple, okay? Because this is where that ends you up. But also, he's here because he loves Jesus enough to follow him into the place that is the most hostile to him. That's what we have here. And as that comes to a head, he realizes, I'm done. I got to do something. And out of fear and total panic, he throws this out there. Now, I'm not trying to justify it. He's wrong. Just so we're clear, he's wrong. But he is wrong out of panic. And he is wrong because of panic. And when we don't prepare, we panic. If we are not convinced completely of who Jesus is, we panic. So he panics, he throws it out there, and then, a little later, the bystanders came up. Now, one of these bystanders is a relative of the guy who just lost an ear and then gained an ear. He is a cousin, brother. The word that's used is it's the most inclusive of family terms in first century Judaism. It's kind of like if you ever meet somebody from the South and they start talking about their uncle or their aunt, it may be their uncle or their aunt, or it might be a cousin. It might be because I've got people, I'm not even sure if I'm related to them. They just have those names. And some people who I thought I was related to, I've recently found out, we're not related. Then why do we call them uncle? Why? And I don't know. I still haven't got a good answer, but that's how that works. So this is that broad, he is a relative of the guy who just lost an ear, Malchus, which clearly his parents hate him if they're going to name him Malchus. But he lost an ear, Jesus gives it back, and one of his relatives is in this crowd. And the implication of that is that he's probably not too far from Malchus, right? He's gotten what just went down. And now he's here because that throws a wrench in this whole we were confident of who Jesus wasn't thing. If he's putting ears back on guys that are killing him, that's weird. Which is also pretty important of how you love your enemies, by the way. Just, that's free. But here, then he began to curse and swear. This is as strong as he can possibly make it. Cross my heart, hope to die. Okay, as the childhood playground thing goes. This is no, and he just goes on a rant in which he is attempting to show, but it only makes the charge of why he is getting accused of being a disciple that much more kind of funny in my sense. And this is what I mean by that. Came up to and said to Peter, surely you two are one of them, for even the way you talk gives you away. Your accent gives you away. Is the way in which that's actually in the Greek, I believe. And it's the notion of you don't sound like you're from around here. And I had to be really careful of how I said that. right? I think I've lost most of my accent. I think I can kind of pass for somebody from Missouri. And sometimes I hear myself say things and I go, that's not right. You know, but this is where Peter finds himself. You know, like when you ask for a soda in a restaurant, who says that? Obviously, I did the other day, and I was horrified at it. But these are things that mark us out. If you're in the South and you're going to order a soft drink, it's a Coke. And I find myself, when somebody says, would you like a Coke, what has always been the answer up until recently has been, well, what kind do you have? And then you get the, what? We have Coke? Yes, but Mountain Dew, Mount Yellow, Pepsi. Like Pepsi is Coke. I'm sure Pepsi hates that. But that's the way it works. And it's things like that that just betray. You know, when I order tea and it comes out unsweetened, I'm like, what? What is this? You know, and I'm glad that some of you understand my problems. First world problems, I know. But in the process of things, these are things that give us away. And sometimes when we get tired and our accent gets really thick, because again, Peter is not guarding his accent here. And I'm sure that he is throwing y'all around a lot. I'm sure that he is, I don't know what y'all talking about. Or, you know, I'm just going to get on out of here. You know, like these are phrases that are probably coming out of his mouth. And it marks him out. So when he is now panicking and he is now pushing as hard back as he can, his accent is just going all over the place. I mean, he's now using which is just going to make him that much more noticeable. But notice, it is the way in which he talks that gives him away. Another reason why we don't get tempted like Peter does is because we don't sound no different. Or we don't sound any different. This is why I think about things before I say them most times. We don't sound any different than the world. I had just this morning, I looked on Facebook, and I have a teacher friend back home. Great guy. If what I want is somebody to teach children, you know, like math and algebra and science and nature-y things. Great teacher. But he posed, you know, God is love, and that's really all you need to say. And what he means by that is totally different than what John means by that. And what every church should mean by that. And we find, you know, so we're trying to use the language. We're trying to use it so we don't sound all that different. You know, I tried when I first moved up here to cover up my accent. And I think I have, sadly. Now I'm wondering why I did that. But in the course of things, that's the problem. You should sound different. You're not from around here. Yes, you may have been born here. This may be where you have a house, but this is not ultimately your kingdom. We as Christians should sound different. We should stick out like sore thumbs. We should be people who, when we talk, everybody else goes, you're not one of us, are you? I mean, you know, when you're standing around the water cooler at work and that conversation comes up, there should be you sound different. You have an entirely separate vocab than we do. That should be true of us. Now, I understand that I'm pushing this a little bit, and that what we're talking about with Peter is he physically has an accent. I get it. He is a hillbilly. I get it. But at the same time, our conversation, using it as Philippians uses it, the way in which we conduct our lives needs to be noticeably different. It needs to be in a sense that when people hear us talk, see us walking around, we are unmistakably people who are with Jesus. And that marks us out so that no matter how much we might try and blend into a crowd, which, by the way, stop it. But no matter how much we might try and blend into the crowd, we stick out like a sore thumb. If I go to Korea, I'm not going to blend in. And I just randomly picked a place, just for the record. I can't blend into that culture. There are other cultures that I can kind of blend into a little bit better until I open my mouth, and then I'm just glaringly wrong. But we cannot just look, if we sound like everybody else, there's a problem. I have a friend who is, I do think, honestly a Christian, and he has repeatedly used the phrase, and it drives me nuts. And he knows it drives me nuts, which may be why he uses it, I'm not sure. But he's like, I like sometimes just to cuss so that my friends know that I'm just like them, except I'm saved. And I'm like, that means you're not like them. You're not like them. Amen. If you're saved. So stop it. Yes, it makes them uncomfortable when you're different. That's the point. It should. And this is what Peter gets. And it's, no, I swear I'm from around here, y'all. No, you're not. We should stick out that badly. So Peter, at this point, is, no. And I'm sure that he is already back into the door. Because he's already back to the courtyard. And as he is denying it, and again, it's not one or two people that are standing, it's a crowd who are, I think, being needled in this process. Because sure, we've got Jesus, we might as well get this guy too. I mean, why leave any of them? If there's such a threat, wouldn't it be good? And if we can't get Jesus to trip up, well, we know his disciples say dumb stuff all the time, right? I mean, this will work for us. That's the notion here. So as soon as it flies out and Peter is done with his rant, he kind of stops to take a breath. Verse 75. In the back end of verse 74. And immediately a rooster crowed. Immediately, as soon as he's done, he hears the rooster, which calls into mind, oh, wait. Yeah. Like, it's that moment for him, which may be why we eat chicken all the time. One spilled on Peter, we're just getting back at him. Maybe, I don't know. Sorry, that probably was the wrong place for that joke. But in the same notion, he hears the rooster, and it's at this moment that we learn in the other gospel accounts that Jesus takes his eyes from the trial and looks square at Peter. Which is interesting because he knows where Peter is. Just remember that. In the middle of all of this hoopla trial, he looks directly at Peter at that moment. And it's a way of saying, I know where you are. I told you, and I know where you are. But here, verse 75, and Peter remembered the word which Jesus had said, before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. So this is that moment in which we realize that Peter, for once, learned something. Peter once got something on the front end before the cross. Unfortunately, it was that he was going to fail. He finally catches on, oh, Jesus told me that. Now, a lot of times we'd be tempted to, all right, now you've all failed, you're all failures, congratulations, you're with Peter, and we move on. Before we hit the invitation, this is, though, what I want us to understand, because I think it's also what Matthew is pushing subtly. Not only did Jesus tell Peter that he would fail, not only did Jesus tell the disciples, you're all going to abandon me and run away like a bunch of scared little girls. And you all need to man up, Buttercup. But also, Jesus said, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. They're going to arrest me. They're going to put me on trial. They're going to kill me by crucifixion. And I'm going to resurrect on the 3rd day. So I'll see you soon. Okay. So when we have here that what Jesus says about this moment comes true, it is meant, yes, to help us feel that low point with Peter, where we go, yep, failure happened. But it's not where he stops. It's not where the story does not end with the crucifixion. If it did, well, we got better things to do with the Sunday morning, even if it's just sleeping in. But because it doesn't stop there, what Matthew is giving us here is that when Jesus says something, when God says something, that's how it is.
Amen.
And to be people of faith, if you flip over to Hebrews 11, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That's not some pie in the sky thing. If you read the list of, and these people showed faith, in that chapter, the Hall of Faith, Hall of Fame, however you want to think about it, it's people who God said this, and then they reacted correctly. They took what God said and implemented it into their lives, even when it wasn't the reality at that moment. Now, I question my own terms, and that's why the air quotes, but in the process, Peter at this point is at that low end. And what we understand is that there is a backwards high end for Peter. And what Peter does do here is he learns from his mistake. When you flip over and you read the gospel, or not the gospel of Peter, sorry, the books of 1st and 2nd Peter, you'll find that he often says you need to watch and pray. You need to prepare. You need to be ready. Satan's coming. It's not something to treat lightly, because he figured out he's not nearly as great as he thought he was. He's not in the position of strength as far as he thought he was. That he was a lot more weak than he thought he was, which is ironic with the thought on the back of the bulletin. This is where Peter realizes, I'm not much of the man I thought I was. But this is also where he is so broken that he's now ready to be brought back. So yes, a low point. But that's where you rebuild. This is that in Peter's life. This is that which really causes him to be broken. And if you also remember, as we bring this to a close, Peter ends up, when he leaves here, back amongst God's people. He doesn't just go down to the coffee shop, and I'm just going to hang out over here. I'm going to be one of these guys for a while. He finds himself, because the next time that when all the disciples are back together post-crucifixion, Peter is right in the middle of them. Peter is once again, well, guys, I'm going to go fishing. And they all go with him. Well, not all of them, but a good portion of them go with him. This is what we need to remember. Yes, there are really junky times. And there are times in which we will come smelling our own failures pretty quick. But that's not the end of that story. It's not for Peter, and it won't be for us.
No.
Father God, we thank you that you are the one